Hi, everybody. Welcome to Optimizing Social Content, A/B Strategies for Success. I'm your co-host, Brian, and along with Verna, we're going to walk you through what growth is. We're going to introduce some frameworks for you to try it. We're going to look at real-world examples, and then we're going to leave you with 52 different things you can start doing today in terms of A/B testing on social media. Let me try to do some quick introductions here. So, Verna.
I'm Verna. I'm a director of design for Adobe Express. And this is my friend and co conspirator, Brian.
I'm Brian. I run the go-to-market team for Japan. I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer, and I live in Tokyo. And one of the things I've started picking up since moving to Japan is karate. Okay, what is growth strategy? You should think of it this way. Take the creativity of design, mix it with some scientific approach and frameworks, and then you come up with different ways you can actually influence user behavior to drive business outcomes. That sounds like a lot, right? But in other words, it's trying stuff imperfectly based on reasonable hunches in order to learn faster. And these are really specific words we chose on purpose, right? Imperfectly means you are going to not necessarily always do the right thing, but since it's based on a hunch, it's good enough in order to get the right signal. And we're going to look at what those signals are later. It's what makes growth testing a little different than more broader, sophisticated efforts. And number one, I've run almost 5,000 growth tests in my career at this point. I think it starts with a mindset, right? So you have a plan, you have an experience, you have a user journey. Things go one way or the other. And growth is a way to not only react to what's happening that might not be exactly what you planned, growth is also a way to anticipate audience needs and to get ahead of the change. One of the most important takeaways from this session that we want you to leave with is this kind of concept of before you start running and trying to do different tests, you really need to take a step back. You have to understand what it is exactly you are solving for. What is it that you're optimizing for at the highest level? And then break that into achievable micro goals. And those micro goals, which will all have some kind of a metric behind it, that's where you're going to really start focusing in on where to test. But you also want to understand what you want to achieve with that test, keeping in mind its relation to the larger goal. The how of testing is also critically important, especially on social media. How do you stay fresh and relevant without getting into cringy territory, right? So this is really where the next value of knowing your audience and staying close to your audience is hyper important. You have to know exactly what motivates them and what their values are before you err too much maybe into being relevant with some of the trends, but you don't want to avoid trends and appear out of date. Staying close to your audience and really understanding them is one of the biggest benefits from a growth mindset. I'm going to hand it over to Verna now. She's going to walk us through content strategy. This is vital for social. And how do we actually build tests on top of it? Verna?
So, before we get into how to test your stuff, you have to have something meaningful to test or just to begin with. Do you know who you are? So you probably have a pretty solid content strategy already. Let's think about a little framework that I find is really helpful for strengthening it up a little bit, for really adding a little bit of that meaningful stuff in there. And once you have a strong strategy, it becomes a lot easier to actually test it. Now, I love to use this framework. It's a content pyramid or an emotions pyramid. And I think what you'll find in here is that if you can hit every layer of this type of content in your strategy, then you're going to reach your audience at not just a functional level, but at a truly meaningful level. And the thing that's important about this is that in general, people are going to be more engaged, more interested, and more loyal to you as a maker, a creator, a company, if you can actually engage with them through some of those meaningful experiences. And they will actually convert more, they'll pay more, they'll come back for more. And one of the examples I love to use is if you just take even a cup of coffee. So, at a really functional level, you wake up in the morning and you want that cup of coffee maybe to give you that little energy boost. So, it has a really specific reason for being there. But on an emotional level, you maybe like the routine or that little ritual, that moment where you get to sort of sit with your own thoughts or sit with your own time for a little bit in the morning. It's something that helps you kind of check in every day and maybe center yourself. But then on a meaningful level, if you think about, let's say, a situation where you are walking to get a cup of coffee and you have two equally beautiful and high quality coffee shops on two different corners on your street, what makes you choose one over the other? There's probably a bunch of different reasons, especially if they are identical in many ways. But maybe you did the Peace Corps several years ago and you're really personally driven by a sense of community and harmony. So maybe it's the coffee shop where they're getting beans from different parts of the world and giving back that draws you in. You might find that maybe it's the ambiance of the other one that goes a little bit further. You feel more calm there. And maybe it's because you generally seek out experiences that are really meaningful when they're comfortable or offer comfort in some way. So it's these kinds of things where if we can tap our content strategy on every level, we can be really successful with connecting. They've actually found that there are about 15 to 18 human experiences that are considered sort of bucket experiences for being really meaningful. So I would encourage you to think about which one or two of these really gets at that meaningful point of the pyramid for you and your brand, and then use that to help think about your content strategy. So let's look at it in action. So looking at REI, if you're not familiar with REI, it's a brand here in North America, and I believe they have a version of it as well in a few other countries, maybe branded differently. And REI is a company that makes their own outdoor gear and also sells other outdoor gear brands. So they offer up anything you would need for any sort of outdoor adventure, whether it's hiking or biking, camping, rock climbing, whatever it is. So if you look at their content out there in the world, when you look at what they do functionally, they really focus on the products themselves, right? They're thinking about different types of labels they carry, different types of products. They tend to leverage Instagram Reels and Pinterest for a lot of this content. And they love to also produce things like how to's, recipes, tips and tricks, things that you may want to refer to, save, and keep around for later. They also love to engage with their audience about some of their products in their reels. So it gives them a chance to have some active communication with their audience members and potential customers. But on an emotional level, they tend to go towards Facebook, Snapchat, and LinkedIn to think about how to present who they are a little bit differently. You won't see a lot of product shots sometimes in these spaces. Maybe you'll see a roll up of, their favorite things every now and then, especially around December. But for the most part, their content on these platforms tends to be more about community. It's really about the experience of being outside with others and what the outside can mean, from a more intentional place a little bit. You'll see in some of these examples, on Black Friday, they decide to close their stores and they do a campaign called Opt Outside. So a lot of that campaign is around what are you doing on that day outside and how can you maybe share where you are with other people who are also doing that. Or they celebrate events that align with their values and how those things maybe connect with being in the outdoors as well. And they really try to speak to also in this billboard ad, on the bottom right, maybe what you're feeling in that moment. I thought it was really interesting that this summer campaign ran during the months of June through August, really prompting someone who might be driving on their commute to think about what they might be doing outside, on a Friday maybe. And then when you look at meaningful experiences, when you see some of their things on Instagram, especially, there's not a product shot in sight. This is where they're really just thinking about what makes life worth it in nature outside. And it's all about wonder. It's the wonder of being outside. It's the wonder of being in beautiful spaces with the people we love. And they feature a lot of real human stories about their customers, about people experiencing the outdoors, things that they're seeing, nature, ideas, and a lot of nostalgia as well. memories of people being outside. So this is really going way beyond just the products they carry, but why we even go outside in the first place. And so by hitting on all three of these levels, you can create a content strategy that will embrace the largest audience that you can and the most active and engaged audience.
Thank you, Verna. That's great. Now that we've gotten through what a meaningful content strategy is, let's have some fun. Let's start to test. Broadly, there's 4 stages to a growth test. Now let's go back to that word we used earlier. Remember the hunch we talked about? We can use a fancier word and call it a hypothesis, but basically, this is centered on your audience first. And you should think of this as, if I do a change, how will my audience react? And the data insights part comes in because you're not just, where's that hunch coming from, right? You're actually looking at different tells. You're seeing the data, or you're actually observing what your users are saying, literally is saying to you. These observations will kind of help you formulate your hunch. You're then going to run the test, and the test is the change. What are you changing in the experience? And then the fun part is interpreting the results. You're going to learn from this, and you're going to just repeat the loop afterwards. Once you learn, you're going to form a new hunch, and you're going to build on top of it. Let's look at some of the insights that you're going to get from this, right? So signals. What's interesting with signals is that you're going to learn about where your audience is most curious. I think you'll understand what it is that they're responding to, and the way things are presented it might impact what they actually end up trying to do. But the intention is also really important. You need to understand what your audience is trying to do. And that happens one way or the other. They're going to be interacting with the test experience in a positive way, or they're going to ignore it. And then experiences are, I think, an important part of this, which means that we have to look at the entire journey before and after the test. You have to understand what happens, what they've gone through before and after. That's going to help you understand if the test was done in the right context. Let's look at some examples. This is an interesting example because what we're looking at here is that the creative is exactly the same, but the messaging is different. And if you look at the left, the messaging here might be geared towards more of a general manager, right? A general audience, where on the right, it's clearly much more tailored towards the social media practitioner, the person who might be running social media campaigns. And this is an important point. Your audience, just like Verna and I, are complicated individuals, right? They have different interests, whether it's pottery and snowboarding, for example, and how those interests manifest will change depending on the platform. Just think of it this way. You would never really test the same exact creative and messaging on LinkedIn and TikTok, right? Even if one of them were the same, say the creative was the same, you'd probably change the tone and the call to action on the messaging because the audiences are just in a different mindset depending on the platform they're in. And this is the inverse of that first A/B test we just looked at. This one is the same exact messaging, but the creative is different. So on the left-hand side, you see the product, and on the right-hand side, you see a user, an audience member using the product. And then you'd build up towards a multivariable test, right? So up until now, some of the examples we talked about were changing the messaging, changing the creative, and seeing what happens there. This would be changing multiple pieces at a time. Now, you wouldn't start with a multivariable test. You would start first with some of those more basic examples, right? Just trying different calls to action, for example. But as you build up momentum, as you build up learnings, your hunches will get stronger, and then you might actually try to do a more complicated test. Now, Verna and I are going to walk you through an example with our dear friend Vic. And Vic is a designer at a brand agency, but she also has a side hustle. And that side hustle is really talking about tips and tricks for design logos and suites and for really using it on social media. And if you just think about Vic's world, right? So she's primarily using Instagram Reels and Pinterest posts. And what she's trying to do as she builds up her side hustle is to drive newsletter signups, right? So Vic has determined that the newsletter is her way to share her expertise and also to kind of cultivate a future audience and maybe some future customers. And from the newsletter, she sends them to different content, whether it's paid templates, different materials. And this is another key moment from our session, which is like what actually happens, right? So we like to do it this way for every 1,000 people, every 100 people, what's actually happening. The key takeaway from this slide, here's your test, right? For every 100 people, drum roll, only 2 are signing up. So remember, what Vic was optimizing for is the newsletter in this instance. So only 2 are signing up. And that's neither good nor bad. It's just a fact. And then that's where our growth mindset will come in. How do we optimize the 2? How do we get that 2 to be bigger? So let's form a hypothesis. Let's form a hunch and what we think is happening here. So Vic's relatively happy with her current cadence, with the volume of her audience, but she's only getting 2 out of every 100 to sign up. But that audience is coming back to watch her reels pretty consistently, for example. So without having a ton of data other than that, we can kind of make some pretty good hunches, right? We can assume that there's just overall email fatigue. Maybe they just don't want to sign up for a newsletter. Or maybe at the moment, they just don't feel like leaving Instagram and clicking off into something else. So that's the area where we recommend Vic start with her test, right? So if she can identify maybe within that 100 who actually is ready for her newsletter, how do we come up with a test for that? So just to kind of walk through the high level here, the no change, that version 1 or control has been her consistent way of posting each week. And then the variant is going to be the test, where we're actually going to change it up a bit and see if we can influence the sign up for newsletter. So I'm going to hand it over now to Verna. We're going to use Adobe Express, which is Adobe's very casual way of being able to kind of gum in quick and easy and make some quick changes. And we're going to look at how Vic can create a test example, soup to nuts, and then we're going to look at the results.
Okay, so we're in Express now, and we are actually in Vic's brand home. Vic uses Express quite a bit for a lot of her other content. So she already has a lot of this stuff set up in here. And you can see she has her logo, her color palette. She's also preloaded in her fonts. And then she has some of the templates that she uses really often. So these are some of the things that she's sending out or posting pretty often. So she told me that she wanted to post this one for tomorrow. So we're going to work with this file. All right, so we're in Vic's file right now, and what we're going to do is we want this to be her next Instagram post. So this was a flyer that she used. So the first thing is, we want this to actually be in an Instagram post size. So we're going to go over here to resize, and you can see right now it's an 8x5x11. So what we're going to do instead is change it to an Instagram square post. And right there we have that resize for us. So now let's get this ready for her to post on her Instagram tomorrow. So this is the version that's going to be her A version. So I'm not going to change anything about this one because we want to see how this is working. She's already got her hunches about it, but we're going to see how this goes. So let's make the B version. But before that, we should probably save it. So we're going to call this Coaching A and give that a save. So now what we can do is make a different version of this. So for the new version, the key here is we want to just make one change, one little small thing that, is going to give us a good idea of whether that change made a difference. So in this case, one thing we're going to do is we're going to swap around some of the content. So we already see that Vic Chen Coaching is at the bottom here. So what I think we should do, Vic, is maybe take this title that you already have up here and move it up so that people get this first thing first. They already know what this is going to be about since we're going to make this about your newsletter. So we're going to have that be about elevate your content strategy. And then over here, now I used this for content strategy last time, but we know this one is about branding tips and tricks. So we're going to swap this out with brand strategy. And now what I'm going to do is we have this call to action you had before. So join the monthly newsletter for tips, tricks, and strategies. So let's make this about your new goal. And we're going to make it a little bit bigger and give it a little more attention here. So your new goal is comment guide to receive a free tips and tricks newsletter and take your brand strategy to the next level. So we have some new copy in here. And let's make sure that this fits our text box. I'm just going to go to the left and do a couple little edits. And maybe another thing that would be good here is to do a little bit of bolding and change the color here. So let's go over here, make this bold, and let's pick a color. This vibrant pink she has is a really nice standout color. So why don't we go ahead and pick that one so that it stands out a little bit. And now we have this empty box, but we want to keep it there so we have that one-to-one comparison. But you know what's missing from here? We're missing her logo. So we're going to tap on that, and we're going to go ahead and put her logo in here. Oops. All right, and so that'll be more distinct. Okay, so now we have her logo here, and here's the version we have. So you can see that we just made some minimal changes, and we're going to go ahead and publish that to social, and I'm going to ask her to do that at a different time the next day. So this will become Coaching B, basically. So I've sent that off to Vic, and she ended up posting it, and what we found out was out of that 100 folks, if we go back to our stats, we had 70 folks who actually saw the Instagram post and watched it or looked at it, engaged with in some way. And from there, we only had 15 people who basically visited the newsletter. So now this time, what Vic told me when she came back and found out how this performed was that she had about 40 people comment in the DM guide. So now she has 40 people that she can go ahead and send messages to personally and reach out, and she can send this free guide to. So we'll have to see down the line now how many people from that actually did visit the newsletter. So we'll find that out, but I think it's a great start. So now let's imagine that Vic got another 15 or 20 people to actually visit the newsletter. That's promising. Something about this is working. How could we take this a little bit further for the next test? So what might be another version of this test? Again, we want to just change one thing and see now how that compares to this version. We know this version's working better, but why don't we maybe think about changing out the image? Vic looks adorable here. Love the photo. But maybe one thing we could do is maybe give people a little bit of a preview of what the guide is, and that might pull them in. So what I'm going to do in this next version is we're going to move the logo out for a second, and we're going to move Vic over to and bring this to the front, and we're going to move Vic over to this little box here where she can still hang out. And her face gets a little small here, so I'd love to improve our crop here so that we can just make her face fit in there just a little bit better. And I also would love to add a little effect. The background there seems to be getting a little muddy. That car is standing out more than her face. So I'm going to hit remove background. And just like that, in one tap, we have Vic looking pretty great, just hanging out right there. And now, let's do a little bit of adjustment too. Let's brighten her up here so that she is really popping on this background. And I would love to have this match my template a little bit more. So I'm going to go to effects, and I'm going to use one of my favorite features in here and give her a little bit of a fun monotone look here. And then we're going to bring her logo back in so that people still realize that this is our favorite Vic that we know and love. So maybe what we can do is make her logo a little bit bigger, pop it in the background, and we're going to make the logo. See if we can recolor it to be another color. So go to effects and see if we like a color from here that matches her brand. Let's go with the pink. All right, so we have a little bit of a lockup there. That's kind of a fun one. And we're going to keep our copy the exact same because that's what we talked about. But let's put in an image, I think, of what the newsletter might look like and change up this image space. So if I go over to my brand, she has some assets I know saved in here that she told me she put in. And this is an image of one of her guides where she basically has an option to figure out your goal setting for the week and how to keep yourself accountable to that. So she's loaded that up here as an image. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. So what we're going to do is put that in here. And I don't want it going over there. I want it to fit in here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit crop and freeform. And so now what we can do is we can also crop this image a little bit so that it fits exactly where we want it to. Okay, and then these stars feel a little bit too extra because we already have some stars on the template itself. So we're going to go ahead and delete those, make sure this is centered, and maybe we want a little something behind it also. So I'm also going to go to elements, and what I could really use here is maybe a rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and search in there for a rectangle, and I see a rectangle I like here. So when I load that in, you might notice that it wasn't gray. It's because it's already putting it into some of the brand colors that I already have pre-loaded into Express. So I'm going to make this border black, and we are also going to make it a little bit thinner so it matches the look and feel of her template. And we're going to size it so that we can have it sort of be behind here. And now if I don't want to mess around with ordering, all I can do is go over here and adjust it a little bit. And now we have a little bit of a little backing shape. So that gives it a little pop there. So we are looking good to go here. And I can also adjust that line if I wanted to. I like it a little bit thinner. I think that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is we have yet another version of this test. So this time we're going to see if the visual changes make a difference. So I sent this off to Vic and the results are in. So what we found out was in the last test, we had that number of newsletter signups go from 15 to about 25. And this time, what we saw was these visual changes actually did impact it more. So the numbers went up just a little bit. We went from 25 to 35, so just 10 more people visiting the newsletter. However, we saw a big jump in people actually signing up for the newsletter. So before we had about 3 people for every 15 or so. Now we actually saw that about 15 of that 35 signed up. So we can see that more people are engaging, even though the numbers have only shifted a little more with views. So something about this is working. Something about this is telling us that maybe giving people a little bit of a vision of what to expect and what they're going to get is really going to help. So we're going to do one more iteration because Vic wants to do one more test with this and see what else can we do to make this happen a little bit more, to make that engagement number go up a little more. Now, one of the things that we found is that motion can really help. So on her Instagram feed, this is going to be a pretty static post. So why don't we add in a little bit of motion? And that's probably one of my favorite things about Express because you do not need to be an animator. You do not need to be a motion designer to do this really quickly and to add a little something to something you've already made. So one of the things I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger so that we can see it better. And the other thing we're going to do is have this hold our audience's attention. When they see this, they just see everything all at the same time, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And when I scroll down here, you'll see this amazing animation panel that we have here. So with animations, let's give it a little something to come in on. So we've got a typewriter effect here. You can preview by just hovering over. That looks pretty good because people might stick with me a little longer and want to stay around to read it. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that one. And now that I've picked it, you can see it's already applied that animation. And I'm noticing that it's adding this little audio layer as well. So that might be interesting. Let's come back to that. I think there's something we could do with that. And the other thing is I love these little branded star elements she has. And so I think I want to make these a little bit bigger. Let's give a little more attention, and we'll leave this one small because this is right up towards the top. And let's animate these too. So I'm going to select both of them at the same time. Whoops, we have this one. Move that to the front. So I'm selecting this little star, and I'm also going to select this star. And then I'm going to go back to my animation panel, and let's look for something that loops, something that'll play the whole time. So we've got Bob. Okay, that gives it like a fun little swimming effect. We also have spin. Oh, I kind of like the spin. It feels like it sparkles. So we're going to pick that. But I want it to go a little bit faster. It feels a little bit slow. I want it to have a little more energy. So I'm going to click this little slider here and let's see if we can give it the vibe we want. Okay, we have a few different personality things here. So energetic feels kind of like what I was looking for. So let's pick that. Still a little slow. So I'm going to up the intensity, but I really like that little star flare. So what happens if we do it there? That has a really fun motion to it. And we're going to lower it just a little bit more. Yeah, I like that. That feels like it has a good energy to it. So we've got that, and it's applied to our other star as well. Let's check that out. Yep, it's already highlighted. Okay, so we have a couple things there. Let me hit play and see what we got. All right, that's looking pretty good, but I feel like it needs something more, something else. Maybe we could do this, Vic Chen coaching, because it'd be really nice timing wise for that to come in after you've seen the other things animate. So I'm going to go ahead and pick animation again over here. And let's have that maybe slide up or something. I think that would be really cool. So we've got some sliding options here. We have a rise option. Ooh, I like the rise option. That has a nice sort of gentle, not too pushy thing going for it. So we're going to pick that. And let's see what we're looking at now. So if I zoom back out, that looks pretty good. It's subtle, but it's a fun way to bring some attention to what we have here. Okay, I'm really intrigued by this audio thing because now I'm kind of wondering if it would be cool for Vic to maybe even record a little audio bit here so that someone sees it. So I'm going to put in a placeholder audio for her and see how that works out. So I'm going to hit audio and we're going to do a record voiceover. That's cool. So let's do that instead of some music. All right, I'm going to do my best Vic impression. So starting the recording. Hey guys, this is Vic. I would love for you to check out my best free tips and tricks on the things I've learned about brand strategy in just the last couple months. Check it out and make your brand strategy better than ever for the new year. We're almost over with 24/24. Okay, now it wasn't perfect audio, but at least she gets the idea of what we want to do. So now I'm going to take that audio and I'm going to match that up with my, whoops. Okay, we're going to take this audio and we're going to match this up with my image here. And I can drag this and I can make this long enough to basically match up exactly with what my audio track is. Okay, I think this will be really fun. And we're going to go ahead and delete this. All right, so now we have a little post here. So why don't we take a look with the audio and everything all together? Hey guys, this is Vic. I would love for you to check out my best free tips and tricks on the things I've learned about brand strategy in just the last couple months. Check it out and make your brand strategy better than ever for the new year. We're almost over with 24/24. Yeah, so I don't love how that worked at the end because I kind of stumbled a little bit. So let's give it a little trim. For 24. For the new year. We're almost over with 20. We're going to end it right at new year. And so now I can go ahead and trim that a little bit, make sure that that sounds good. New year. A little more there. And I can go ahead and trim this down, and I think we are ready to go here. So we have a great little clip for her. So we're going to send that off, and she has another iteration. So Vic came back to me and she said that she had some pretty phenomenal results with that post. And that was just from doing a fourth A/B test.
Thank you, Verna. I mean, one of my big takeaways was just how easy it was to do those changes in Express. So now we have gone through a couple different iterations, right? We looked at the results. So we went from 2 newsletter signups to 4, and then we went from 4 to 30. That's pretty incredible. But let's just understand how to interpret results, right? So whatever test you're doing, they're either going to be inconclusive. And what that means, and we'll talk about statistical significance in a bit, but what that means is just that you don't have enough going one way or the other. You just can't tell if the test is won or not. You're not getting any different results. A win means that the test experience performed better. You got more signups. And loss would just mean that it actually had the opposite effect of what you were intending. And again, there's no good or bad from any of these. It's actually all learning. Inconclusive would mean just let the experience run longer, let the test run longer until you get a good signal either way. A win would mean you should consider making that your new baseline experience from which you will do further testing. And a loss would mean you go back to the drawing board and just come up with a different test. Verna and I are going to walk through a couple of tips and tricks now as you come up with your test ideas. So one clear one, especially on social, is to make it move, right? You want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to grab attention and to engender some curiosity. You can see right here on this Pinterest post, the one in the middle, the Pinterest board, that movement really catches your eye. Global trends. I mean, there's lots of tools available that you can use in order to kind of understand what people are searching for and what mind shifts are happening out there. And again, remember what we said earlier about cringy. You want to be aware of the trends. You don't necessarily need to act on all the trends. And in fact, you might stand out by not acting on some of the trends. The call to action is one of the most important pieces of a test, especially on social media. You want to be very clear with what you want your audience to do. That's the easiest way to make sure that you'll get a strong tell one way or the other with the results of the test. And look, loops, I used to really dislike this term loops. I kind of used to eye roll when people talked about the concept, but I've come around because to me, what loops means is that you are thinking through what happens after the test, right? Your audience is they're living and breathing people that go about their day, and what's going to happen next time they come back to your experience. For Vic, next time they come back to her post, you should always be thinking in that term as well, because you want to understand how to build upon the experiences that you're testing. Consider the moment, the timeliness of the experience in the test, just being mindful. I mean, it could be as simple as the day of the week. And we've seen different tests perform considerably with different results because of the ways that we took advantage of the seasonal moment, whether it's a big sporting event in certain markets or whether it's the time of day that the post is made. And here's some examples. So that's Summer of Magic Camp Out series. Okay, right here are 52 things you can do right now to start A/B testing on social media. We broke this up into copy and messaging, design and visuals. Those are examples we walked through a bit earlier with Vic and then other examples out there. Then there's offer and promos, the layout, and Verna walked through a bit of this also within Express, and then the triggers and the flow. And we talked about that, like the call to action as well. And one note on statistical significance, there is a calculator here you can use. This is really what we use at larger companies when we have thousands and thousands of audience members that are going through the experience, that we want to make sure that we're getting the right tell before we make a meaningful change. For something like Vic, this might not be quite necessary. Vic will look at a smaller audience and go through it. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as Verna and I have. We are so grateful that you sat through this, and please do take advantage of what we shared and go out there and build your growth mindset. Thank you.